Hey everyone, so this is Dr. Benjamin Mitchell Yellen, back with another lecture video to help you understand this week's reading, which happens to be over Lochner versus New York. So let's go ahead and get on into that. Before we get into the basic facts of the case, I want to mention that if you have not already completed the reading, please pause the video here, go do the reading, and then when you come back, see if our interpretations were different or if I helped to clear up any confusion for you guys in writing your week 16 discussion boards that are due on Thursday. So now we can get into the basic facts. Number one, the Bake Shop Act. The name of the New York law specifically in question, and in its language, it prohibits bakery owners from requiring or permitting their employees to work more than 10 hours a day or 60 hours a week. Second is Joseph Lochner, the name of the bakery owner that permitted his employees to work more than 60 hours. The first time he was fined $25. The second time he ended up appealing and not paying the fine, and it ended up in the Supreme Court. Third, we have the 14th Amendment. Specifically, we're going to focus on the Due Process Clause. So the state shall not infringe on life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Specifically, liberty pertains to this case. So is the personal liberty of bakery owners and bakery employees being threatened unconstitutionally under this statute? On the next slide, we have the legal issue and the holding. The legal issue is, does this constitute a legitimate use of state police power? The majority is going to say no. The New York Bake Shop Act violates the freedom of contract that is protected through the idea of liberty in the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. On the next slide, I have the majority and dissenting opinions. The dissenting opinion I will not go over today. We're going to specifically focus on the majority opinion, but later in the presentation, I do provide links for further reading if you would like to go check this out and are interested. The majority opinion is given by Justice Peckham, and he is joined by Justice Fuller, Justice Brewer, Justice Brown, and Justice McKenna. And the dissenting opinion is written by a familiar name, Justice Harlan, who we've read before. And he is joined by Justice White and Justice Day, and then we also see a solo dissent from Justice Holmes. Now we can get into the majority opinion and the rationale in this opinion. Again, this opinion is given by Justice Peckham. So first he starts off with this very fixed interpretation of the Constitution. So the individual right to contract is not absolute, and neither are state police powers. So he's basically saying that both have their constitutional limits, neither are universal protections. Secondly, the state cannot use its police power to protect from poor decisions of its citizens unless the citizen is a ward of the state. So here he's just trying to say that this is kind of an arbitrary law to be using police power of the state to enforce. Third, we have the premise saying that work hours do not substantially undermine public health, and a baker is not necessarily a dangerous occupation. So this is not a public health issue. It's not pandemic scale. It's literally just limiting its scope to bakers in New York. So it's not likely that it's going to be constitutionally protected, especially since it's an arbitrary reason. Therefore, the Bake Shop Act is unconstitutional usage of police power, and the lower court ruling is reversed. This case happens to be remanded back to the county court for further proceedings, and they have to abide by basically what the majority says in this case. So I'm going to say that this is a very fixed theory of constitutional interpretation, just because that Justice Peckham really relies on the protections granted and that have been upheld for quite a while in the Constitution, and he applies them very literally. Since a case before this established the precedent that the freedom of contract does pertain to the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause, he's really working with that in mind, and also the scope of state police powers. What should the state be able to enforce? What laws should they be able to enforce, and how? On the next slide, I have a quote from Justice Peckham in the majority opinion. So he says that clean and wholesome bread does not depend upon whether the baker works but 10 hours a day or only 60 hours per week. In the majority opinion, Justice Peckham tried to establish a basis of Maybe the New York law rests on a public health issue. Maybe that's what they're concerned about. And he does not find a public health issue. So then he says maybe it's the condition of the work environment for bakeries. And they find, yet again, no evidence that the work conditions are specifically bad. And now he's saying that it must be the quality of the bread then. Clean and wholesome bread does not depend upon the hours worked. So you can see how he's kind of making fun of the New York statute in question. On the next slide, I have some related cases. These all establish precedents that were relevant to this case and the majority opinion, and they even reference a lot of these in the opinion. So first we have Allgaier versus Louisiana, established that the freedom of contract is protected by the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause, and that's why you see that specific amendment come to play in this case. Second, we have Holden v. Hardy, which protected the right of the state to set hours for dangerous jobs. So that of coal miners, anything where you could directly get injured from carrying out the functions of the occupation. Those hours were regulated. Third, we have Jacobson v. Massachusetts, the exact same year, except Jacobson was a little bit earlier. So Jacobson protected the right of the state to enforce mandatory smallpox vaccinations with state police power. Lastly, we have West Coast Hotel v. Parrish, which overturned the rationale given in this case and really protected the right of the state to set a minimum wage. This was the first time the Supreme Court had taken a stance on government interference in individual economic liberty, specifically the consequences of freedom of contract that's protected in the 1897 court case of Allgaier versus Louisiana. The next slide concludes my presentation on Lochner versus New York. I hope that this lecture video helped to clear up confusion. Also, if you're still kind of confused or if you want to know more, on the next slide I do have links posted so that way you can either read a summary of the Lochner decision or you can actually read the opinion given, and then the other link is a YouTube link. Other than that, thank you for watching my lecture video on Lochner versus New York. I hope that, there's questions and we can discuss in the comments below. Besides that, this has been a great semester, so thank you guys, and we got through it. So let's go celebrate.